Heather, let's take a look at this week 2 assignment 3 drawing. One thing you definitely have going for you in this drawing is the amount of color and the color variety in place. I think we see a lot of people this week playing it very safe with the color, a lot of the elements, the background. It's kind of amazing that a lot of people just kind of stick to 2 colors and a bunch of grays, and the drawings I think tend to feel, not as visually engaging as they could be. And so I think this is definitely one of the strengths of this drawing, is just the variety that's going on. The woods, you're not just kind of creating the same wood, but you're using different colors within it. The sphere especially being one of the more colorful elements, but even the background itself, the yellows and the blues together, they create a very kind of great complementary color scheme that, again, I don't think it feels like you're overusing the color. It feels, especially the background, it feels smartly applied. I think texturally some things work, some things don't work. I think the bricks to me still feels very kind of off, and I think that if not being told what this specific texture was, I think I'd have a hard time placing it. I think the main thing is with brick is you really have to have the mortar included and the individual bricks. I think it's very difficult to create a red stone texture that feels like brick. And this, I think maybe the mark making is a little bit too, it's a little bit too rough along kind of the edges, where it starts to create its own kind of, almost kind of like a certain type of fabric or a furriness to it, and I think it needs to be contained a little bit more. I think when I think of brick texture, I think more of kind of like a sandy texture, something that has a fine grit to it, rather than what I think is here is almost like kind of large chunks or almost like crystal-like offshoots going on. So it might need to be just toned down a little bit. The color is brick 100%, and I think that aspect, again, like the rest of the composition, is pretty spot on and shows good amount of variation. But I think just kind of the mark making and the way that it kind of hits the edges, it's just a little too much. The rest of them feel good. The wood feels very good, although I think you could kind of play around with just a little bit more color application within the wood ones, especially the lighter wood, getting a little bit of greens or even a few oranges or reds, just not kind of overstating them, but just in some of the grain. I think it could actually help to create a little bit more variation within the texture itself. But the grain feels very good and the base coloring is good. I really like the metallic texture, and I very much like the sphere. The only other kind of criticism I'd give is the background technique. It's very rough, and I think in a lot of cases it starts to take away from the main elements, especially when it's concerning the edging, where we have these kind of gaps of white that are fairly apparent in a lot of areas, and you're not cutting your edges on the outside of the shapes, and we're getting a lot of these kind of edge issues, seeing a little bit of bleeding occurring, and I think we're seeing a lot of kind of inconsistencies within the blind. I think you just have to be a little bit more careful, especially when you have these large areas to deal with, that you try to get them as consistent as you can. The metallic texture that you have in place, it feels like you're, just very carefully putting the marker down in place, but the background doesn't feel like it has that consistency, and I think that it needs to have it. At the very least, the edging needs to happen a little bit better, because it's just there's too many of these little kind of areas occurring. And again, it's not an issue until it starts to take away from the main elements, and I think especially in kind of the sphere underneath it and some other areas it starts to. So it's just one thing where I think just spending a little bit more time and just being a little bit more kind of cautious with it, it'll pay off overall. But it's still, I think, a very good drawing. I would say overall the textures feel a lot better than the last assignment, and I think your color application, again, is you're experimenting, you're not holding back, and I think it really works out well for this drawing.